Happy Monday. Thank you for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. Now, we are going to postpone unfinished quotes. We're moving it to next week. You see, this week we are talking about something that I have been processing over the past couple of months. I recently went to go through the process of seeing whether I am on the autism spectrum or not. And there was a lot of soul searching to determine whether it was a journey that I wanted to go down. And I remember it started a very long time ago. I was a leader working at Walt Disney World, and we had a college program cast member who came in and they let us know that he had Asperger's syndrome. And I found myself coaching this cast member for a lot of the same things that I had gotten in trouble for early in my leadership career. And I noticed those similarities, but didn't think too much of it because the research that came out around autism really didn't fit me. Fast forward, all of the research coming out around autism in women, the story started changing. It started fitting like a glove, if I'm being honest. And when I think about who I was as a kid and as a teenager and my early adulthood and who I am now and all of the tools and the resources that I have, there was still always that disconnect that sometimes it felt like I was putting on a show. When this research began coming out and it showed that women with autism tended to be high performing, have high anxiety, people pleasers, I was like, check, check, check. And those made me think through, do I wanted to continue looking into it? And so down the rabbit hole I went, which led me to getting the assessment. And I went to a center that specializes in autism, and they do a lot of work with women with autism. And I can remember this very clear moment where I was talking to the psychiatrist during my intake to determine whether I was a good fit for the assessment or not. And I mentioned that ever since my daughter was born, I'm very focused on her to the point where like I have to be intentional about not letting her feel that focus. And most of my anxiety centers around her. She looked at me and said, so would you say that you're hyper-focused on her? I was like, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And she said the research is showing that women hyper-focus on people, whereas boys and men tend to hyper-focus on, like we've heard the stories about a boy focusing on dinosaurs or cars or trains or wars, something like that. So for girls and women, it tends to be people, which explains so many of my relationships growing up. It was like that last puzzle piece that clicked into place. Then I went through the assessment and got the results that I was expecting, and I am on the spectrum. If you've seen me speak, you've probably heard me joke from the stage that working at Walt Disney World, they beat the nice into me, but it's not really a joke. There was a lot of amazing mentors and leaders and tools that were offered to me working at Walt Disney World, and a lot of difficult conversations that helped me understand what I intended to do and my impact. How people felt what I intended to do were very different. And so these leaders, you've heard me talk about Michelle and Diane and so many other leaders that really helped me understand that gap between the two. And so now when I go into social situations, a lot of those, I used to call them rough edges, but now I know as part of being autistic, a lot of those quirks, if you will, have been masked. They don't show up the same way. And this is still new, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to do with it. There's been a lot of new questions that I have about it. When I got my results, there was a lot of anger around it as well, a lot of really mixed emotions. But it's also been really freeing to know that I wasn't just a weird kid. My brain thinks differently and looks at things differently. And when we think about like my profession, I go very, very deep into leadership. All of my degrees are in leadership, my bachelor's, my master's. I'm currently getting my PhD in leadership. This is that hyper focus, that professional hyper focus of leadership. So as I'm going through this journey, I'm sensing a lot of other pieces around it. And the reason why I am sharing this with you is because I think we have a lot of different individuals on our teams. And sometimes we have this idea of what neurodivergence looks like, whether that's ADHD or autism. We have these ideas of what it looks like. And the reality is it can look very different. The main driver for getting my assessment is when I would talk about things like equity, diversity, and inclusion, I would use neurodivergence as a starting point for the conversation. It was a way to begin a conversation. I would say, I think I'm on the spectrum. And I would have people with the best of intentions come up after and say,
"You're not on the spectrum. I have a nephew that's on the spectrum. You're nothing like him."
and while again, the intentions were good, what I was receiving from those conversations was if I was on the spectrum, then that was bad. And as a kid, it was painful. Very clear, it's very painful. But as an adult, it's a superpower for me. I don't think of it as a bad thing. I think it could have been very different if I would have had tools and resources and there would have been conversations about what it is and what to expect. But as an adult now, it is most definitively a superpower. And so if you have somebody on your team that identifies as being autistic or having ADHD or any of the other ranges of mental differences that we can have, I want you to know that it doesn't always look like what we think it does. It can show up in very distinct and unique ways. And maybe it's time to begin reconsidering the expectations and the stereotypes that we have around neurodivergence. And if you are neurotypical, maybe doing some research on your own to begin learning about what that looks like. So if and when you do get somebody on your team that identifies as neurodivergent, you have more tools to be able to assist that person. And even if it's not a direct assist, maybe not an indirect hurt. So there will be a lot more information coming out around this. I'm planning on doing a series around neurodivergence probably in the August timeframe, but I wanted to go ahead and have this conversation now. And if you have any questions or you just want to reach out, drop a comment, respond to the email, however you see this video, go ahead and respond. I would like to continue the conversation. It's still new and I'm finding my learning method is to teach. So it helps me along the way too. Thank you very much for joining me for this week's Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. I hope you have an amazing, amazing week. And don't forget, as always, we got this. I'll see you next week.